Hello, bonjour. So I was asked to come here today to speak about finance. And I'd like to do that by telling you about stories, perhaps one of the few things left in the world more powerful than world finance. Now, stories are what tells society the limits of its world. They would tell us what is possible and what is not possible. The stories that we tell today create the world of tomorrow. For example, the story... two of them. For example, the story that some people are born superior to rule while others toiled. This story informed and created our world for over 1,000 years. Or the story of the American dream, that the American way can lift up the world's poor and cure its ills. The stories that we tell, they create our world. Now, my story begins in 1973. I was born in Washington, D.C., George Washington Hospital, born to inherit this American dream. Now, what did I inherit? As we see, from 1946 until I was born in 1973, productivity in the United States increased dramatically, 100%. Now, this is productivity gains. This is not artificial stock market gains. But more astonishing is that median family income, the average money people brought home, increased right along with it. In other words, the gains of economic prosperity were indeed shared with the masses. The American dream was as real as the New York skyline. Now, this dream captivated the world, from Singapore to Santiago, from South Africa to even the demise of the Soviet Union. This dream shaped our world. The problem with this dream is that it stopped coming true. Now, some have speculated that this is because the US economy simply slowed down. But as you see from the slide above, this is not the case. US productivity continued its upward ascent as it had before I was born, until the present day when, by some accounts, it's even accelerated. However, in the year I was born, median family income diverged sharply from this productivity gains. And in the last 40 years, has more or less flatlined and gone nowhere. By some measures, the overall US prosperity for the average American has actually declined, if you include measures such as average household debt. So the dream, this story of the American dream, has now been shattered. This story that shaped the world is now in the process of annihilation. Now, you might think this is a US story, but what's more likely is it's just happening in the US first. That the US is an experimental place, a harbinger of what is to come elsewhere in the post-industrial world. That the decline of the average worker is not unique to the US, but only first perfected there. So you might ask, why is this happening? Why is there this shift in the fortunes of the average American? Well, with all the downward indicators in the American economy, there is one very bright spot. We can see it maybe. One more. Finance. Now, as you'll see, from the time of my birth from 1947 until shortly after I was born, the finance's share of US corporate profits, which is represented here by the purple line, more or less stayed stable. It flatlined. And then something dramatic happened. Suddenly, a few years after I was born, it took a meteoric rise and actually caught up to all the gains in productivity and started to track them from then on. In fact, it did more or less the opposite of what median family income did, which had tracked productivity gains and then flatlined. You'd be forgiven if this almost looked causal. And in fact, many, many economists have suggested it is, that the gains in the US economy have been captured almost entirely by the financial industry. Let me tell you this story a different way, the way it's told in the street without charts or historical analysis. The story is that people and the values that they hold dear, including our planet, are literally captured. They're literally trapped within the balance sheets of the world. They are relegated as costs to the cost column, as wages and expenses, all for the benefit of the bottom line, all for the benefit of holy profit. As this story goes, we are now in the age of the rule of finance. Now, to fully understand this story, it's not just spelling the demise of the middle class. This story spells the demise of all that we hold dear, as everything is subordinated to the pursuit of profit. Now, the stakes here cannot be watered down. It is about our very survival. Now, this is not my story. This is the story I've heard from people across the globe. The story is that, the story of now is that profit is above everything. But what if there's a different story? What if there's a story in which the yield we seek is greater than just financial return? A story in which people and the values we hold dear are central and actually dominate, and which finance just helps us to achieve those values. Well, this is not a bedtime story. This is the story I'm here to tell you. What if there were a story in which our economy, not just our government, were democratic? A story in which people were not trapped in balance sheets, but were actors, actively creating our world around their values. And a story in which finance, rather than being the end for which we work, we're a tool helping people achieve their values. This is the story I'm here to tell you. Now, maybe this sounds like it's too good to be true. It's just a good idea that'll never happen. So I'm going to bring it down to earth and tell you about how it already is happening. I'm going to tell you the story of the New Era Windows Worker Cooperative. Now, the Windows business in the United States, it's a good business to be in. It has no competition from abroad. It has good margins. But in one factory, the owners were content to just have a solvent business. And so they played a financial shell game. Now one of them was in prison, another was paying a massive fine. But as usually, innocent are the ones who suffer the most, for hundreds of jobs were lost in this scandal. But in this case, the workers did not resign themselves to being pawns on someone else's balance sheet. The workers decided to become actors. And for the first time in over half a century in the United States, the workers occupied their factory. Now, this happened during the financial crisis, and it captured the imagination of the American public. The American public had become used to the idea that firings and factory closures, that was the end of the story. But here were workers writing their own story. And so eventually, these workers won. They were given everything they were owed, and they left the factory, and the factory closed. But the story did not end there. For once these workers had become actors, they couldn't go back to being pawns on someone else's balance sheet again. And so the workers decided they would reopen their factory themselves. They would do it together, democratically. And they came to us, the working world, to help them do it. Now, in providing the capital these workers needed to reopen their factory, we turned the rules of finance upside down. We took people who were seen as just costs and allowed them to be actors and owners. Let's see a little bit of their story, please.
I'm gonna take the chance.
You're prepared to be arrested?
I'm prepared to be arrested if it's necessary.
We've been here since yesterday and we aren't going anywhere. We are committed to this.
It wasn't long before the media showed up. And given the mood of the country toward the bailout, Even the TV anchors had run out of sympathy for the banks.
Look, if we, the taxpayers, are going to provide a bailout for companies like Bank of America, then the least they can do is use those funds on American workers and companies.
When it comes to the situation here in Chicago with the workers, I think they're absolutely right. What's happening to them is reflective of what's happening across this economy.
It's really beyond what we had first initially imagined, and so now we're dreaming a little bit. You know, we even had a conversation, well, what if we just tried to run the factory as like a cooperative? Well, we don't have any money, we're not capitalists. Something that we've got to think about. We're having those kind of conversations, and the workers are thinking about it, and it's a difficult thing, because, you know, if you've been told your whole life that things are the way other people tell you they are, to be able to think, well, no, I can make it different is quite a big deal.
Some workers who received national attention 5 years ago because of a worker sit-in now have quite an interesting turnaround. You might remember they took part in a protest at Republic Windows and Doors. Now, they're the new owners.
If you take a look at the facility, you'll get an idea of what's about to happen here. It is one of the few manufacturing co-ops in the U.S.
Our future, our lives doesn't always have to be in someone else's hands, that we can take control of our destiny.
And it's a new era for the working class.
If they're given a piece of the pie, then they will bring that knowledge to bear on the final product.
Buy windows, buy windows, buy windows.
Pues cuando yo vine aquí, 1973, yo vine aquí por primera vez. Pues yo vine a trabajar, yo empecé a trabajar en fábricas, en restaurantes, y pues nunca llegué a pensar que me pasaría que yo estuviera en una cooperativa o que yo fuera a tener un negocio como es este.
Everybody might have a different opinion, but we all had to sit down, discuss it, you know, come to terms, and then we do what we got to do. Just being an owner is uplifting.
We all sit at the table now together, you know, but when we was at the other series of Republic, we on one side and they on the other. Yeah, but it makes me feel so much better. Makes me full, makes me want to cry. Yeah.
Now, in this story, when this factory closed, all their financial institutions, they turned away, but we actually provided all the capital the workers needed to buy this factory. And when we allowed them to be owners, immediately everything changed. The first thing the workers did was they moved the factory across town to someplace much cheaper. They did it all themselves, and that single move, they already saved 20% the cost of the investment. They then sat down and decided to design a new factory floor, one that was much faster and efficient than the old one. They laid out all the machines, installed the electrical, they fixed everything and got the machines working. Now they are producing windows. But not just any windows. They're producing the cheapest and the best windows in Chicago. And this isn't me saying this. This is what their customers are saying. Now, the phoenix that's rising from these ashes is not born on a Mark Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs. It's born on immigrant and minority workers whose potential had always been overlooked. So you may ask, why can this not happen more? Well, the problem, of course, there's know-how. The problem is of the awareness. The problem is just opportunity. But the real problem, the biggest barrier, is finance. Without capital formation, you cannot buy or build a factory. And when traditional finance looked at this story, when they looked at New Era, when they looked at these workers, all they saw were costs. They didn't see anything to invest in. And this is where the paradigm has to be shattered. This is the paradigm the working world shatters. When the working world looked at them, when they looked at New Era, we saw not costs, but we saw partners. We saw actors who could unlock the value of their factory probably better than anyone in the world. For things to change, though, it's not enough for finance to simply learn this trick. It's not enough for them to hear this story. Because we have to understand that finance that is designed for its own profit will never give us the public benefits we hope it will. Finance will always look to own and to extract. Only if we design finance for our profit can allow us to be owners and to be actors creating our world. So New Era is an astounding story, and it would be enough to tell you that story alone. But what if I told you that it's not at all unique? In fact, there are thousands of stories just like New Era around the world. In the city of Buenos Aires alone, there are more than 100 stories like New Era. I'll very quickly tell you the story of Argentina. Now, Argentina went through a financial collapse, born of debt. We're all very familiar with this now. It shuttered a lot of factories. But when these factories were shuttered, dozens of workers sued for control of their factories and started running themselves democratically. And now, across Buenos Aires, there are over 100 New Eras. Argentina is where I began. This is where the working world first started and first began creating a kind of finance that would step back and be subordinate for the needs of workers, first proving that we could do this solvently. The working world story is not singular. It's not even plural. It's actually a growing story. And I've helped shepherd thousands of workers from being passive to being actors. In fact, overall, the working world has touched what we have done. We've worked with more than 150 factories. In those factories, we placed more than 715 investments. In all of those investments, 98% have matured and paid back in full. This was to these worker-owned companies in these very difficult environments. Out of those paybacks, 100% of the return came solely from profits from the projects we invested in. There was never a penny that came from collateral or from other sources. Not a penny was ever extracted. I challenge you to find any other financial organization in the world with that record. When people are allowed to be actors, the potential that is unlocked is enormous. The working world has touched and impacted the lives of about 80,000 people now. But this was just our pilot. Our aim now is to grow our fund from 10 to 100-fold. We're not alone in doing this, though. In Argentina, in Nicaragua, in the United States where we work, there are dozens of partners we have to work with. There are federations of worker cooperatives. There are incubators of businesses that work with us. There are networks of peer advisors that work with us. There are activists who on the ground clear the space and push for these changes. And finally, there are the cooperators. There are the workers who become actors themselves. And together, we can make 80,000 become 800,000. And from there, 8 million. And once we can do 8 million, well, then anything's possible. The story tomorrow could be that workers and what we value, that people are freed from balance sheets. But this is not the story now. The best way you can describe the story now is that we're at a crossroads. A crossroads for the post-industrial US, a crossroads for the post-industrial world. Will we continue the same logic, the end of which can only be the return to a two-class society and a vanquished earth? Or can we change the story? Can finance let go its stranglehold in the world? And can workers rise up from being passive to becoming actors, to become owners? Can our economy become democratic? Now, change is not easy, but the choice is absolutely ours to make. In the time it took me to come to France, the working world has already made another investment. As my friends in New Era like to keep telling me, the story of the future is ours to write. Thank you.